Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second episode of the Shaping Inclusive Communities podcast, hosted by Saskabilities. We are so glad that you are joining us here today. My name is Aleks Hoeber. I am the Regional Director of the Yorkton Branch, and I will be your host for this episode. For those of you joining us for the first time today, the podcast idea arose from our Shaping Inclusive Communities conference that we held in Regina back in September of 2025 to celebrate our 75th anniversary. Part of the conference agenda included panel sessions where individuals shared their lived experience as well as their expertise on topics such as empowering transitions from childhood to adulthood, mapping out financial support, building community connections, and innovative housing. The audience's engagement was amazing. We received over 250 questions for our panelists, and there's so many questions and so little time to get to them. So we found that people experiencing disability and their family members, as well as professionals, really wanted to learn from each other. And we thought, what a great idea, but to start this podcast so that we could invite the panelists and other guests to come on and share their experiences as well as their expertise with the disability community right here in Saskatchewan. So let's get to it. Joining me today is Shona Switzer, a parent and advocate. Shona is a mom to two twin sons who were diagnosed with autism at 3.5 years old back in 2000. Shona decided early on how she would approach the world in service of her boys. If barriers to inclusion were in place, she wouldn't just complain about it, she'd do something about it to change it. So welcome, Shona.
Thanks very much, Aleks. I'm glad to be here.
Yes, and I'm glad you're able to join us. I know you and I have worked together for quite a few years now and known each other for a while, and your story has always been very inspiring to me. I really appreciate your ability to persist and persevere when it comes to being an advocate for your boys. And so for those people who were not able to join us at the conference, why don't we start right at the beginning? Can you tell us a little bit about your experience of being a parent, a single parent, to twins living with autism, and what were some key moments that shaped you into the advocate that you have become?
Thanks for that lovely introduction, Aleks. I think I was fortunate in the beginning. I am a registered nurse, and my background is working in critical care. So thinking on my feet kind of started my learning. I think there were some very pivotal key moments in their development that taught me advocacy and understanding for my children with disabilities. I think our first supportive moment was early education, nursery school. The boys had not been diagnosed yet. As you said, they were diagnosed at 3.5 in the year 2000. And at age 3, they started nursery school. We had a very supportive early intervention nursery school teacher. And the first day of class, I take my kids there and I finally realized how behind they were compared to the other children. I broke down crying. I left the room. She followed me out and just met me where I was at, said, "It's okay. We'll work through this." And I think that first entry into an institution with a supportive person gave me the strength to start this whole journey. Then if I tell you, at 3.5, when we got our assessment, it was a team assessment and diagnosis at the Alvin Buckwald Child Development Center in Saskatoon. And here I was introduced to a whole team of professionals who I would lean on their expertise throughout the rest of my kids' growing. Introduced me to OT, occupational therapy, speech therapy, psychologists, social worker, and a developmental pediatrician. Once I kind of knew what each one of these professionals could offer, Then we transitioned into the supports of OT and SLP in school. And the consistency of that support, I think, was pivotal, in all honesty. Through exposures with these professionals, I found that there was, not only did I have a huge knowledge deficit, but they did as well. And I thought, I need to do a lot of research. So I attended every conference I could. I tried as many programs as I could. I read every book I could find. And I found knowledge was power. Not everything worked, but it definitely gave me power. And lastly, and most important, I leaned on family and friends. It takes a village to raise these kids. Raise all our kids. Don't just mean mine, but kids with disabilities take a toll on the family. So I think those were my key moments.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think, and for really highlighting the importance of not feeling like you have to do this all by yourself, right? So just such a good way to get started when you talked about that nursery school teacher who met you where you were at, which is so important for us professionals to remember when we're working with families, as well as to really highlight the amounts and the different types of professionals that are important to have in your support system and in your circle of care. And I love that you talked about taking the initiative right from day one to get involved and to really empower yourself with information, with knowledge, with connecting with others, maybe through these conferences and workshops that you attended. I think it's so important. And I think it also gives people a sense of hope that you don't have to be at this alone, especially for those individuals listening that might have the little one, like the toddler age that you described.
Absolutely. I think I saw myself more as a choreographer between specialists and using, drawing what we needed from each one of them that was most important for the boys.
That's such a nice way to put it. And, you would know best, and we know, right? Families always tell us, like, we know best what the individual, our loved one, our child, our sibling needs. And so to be able to choreograph, like you put it, the support system around based on what you needed and probably when you needed it, right?
Exactly.
So just to kind of help to put things into a timeline, can you let us know how old are the twins now, just to kind of get a sense of how far you've come?
Yeah, we started the journey with diagnosis in the year 2000, and they're 28, going to be 29 in June already. So it's been a couple decades of navigating. Yeah.
It's a long journey, and you've done a fabulous job. It's hard to believe. I think I met you when the boys were just teenagers, probably grade 9, grade 10, I think, starting high school. So even for me to think that they are now almost 30 years old it's incredible. And along the way, I know just from catching up from time to time that they have achieved so many goals. And there are many families of young children experiencing disability who wonder about how to help their children develop skills and work towards increased independence. When we were at the conference, Tempo Grandin talked a lot about the importance of building skills from an early age, which you kind of alluded to as well, and using any opportunity to do so. And I know that this resonated with you. I know Tempo Grandin is someone you had kind of followed in some of those earlier days. And why do you think the message of starting early is so important?
With our kiddos, so Braden and Taylor have autism. And we're talking about children, I understand, with many different types of disabilities. But for mine, who have autism, the opportunity for repetition, the opportunity for hands-on learning, hands-on growth, tactile exploration was huge. And I think Temple talked about that there are so many different types of ways to learn skills and work towards independence. Some are visual, some are auditory learners. And we don't know exactly where our kids will fall if we don't allow them to explore all those modalities. So that's why what she said resonated so much with me, that whatever your child needs to learn, let's support that.
Shona, when you and I were getting ready to record this session, we were chatting about the importance of executive functioning when it comes to learning new skills, during those early years, but also throughout life. And you use the example of, I think, brushing teeth and how many steps that can be broken down to. Can you share with us how executive functioning plays a role in skill development?
Sure. For you and I, other neurotypical individuals, we tend to group many steps together. So if there is a chapter and it has 12 pages, we may just go chapter by chapter by chapter. For example, when you're learning to do something like brush your teeth, you can say to a neurotypical kid who has seen teeth brushing, put toothpaste on your brush and brush your teeth. Here's a timer, rinse and spit, you're done. But for my kids, we broke it down, and I believe, if I recall, it was like 16 steps to brush your teeth. So each step required a skill, from turning the light on when you go into the room, to opening the medicine cabinet, to picking up the toothpaste, to taking the toothpaste lid off, to how much pressure we use to squeeze the tube. And each one of those steps required different skills and different teaching. So to actually learn to brush your teeth maybe took a long time. Parts of it they could do very intuitively, and parts they could not. So executive function allowed them to plan the steps sequentially and put them all together to be able to brush their teeth. So we worked on that for quite a few years. So that it's those kind of things that we don't think of, neurotypical people don't think about, even things like how to smile or getting dressed, how to say hello to a friend. So those kind of things with executive functioning, you need to learn to break down into the minuscule steps. And often they see the minuscule steps before they can see the big picture.
Mm-hmm. So if anyone is listening and this resonates with them and they're thinking, yes, this is exactly what I need to do you have any suggestions for resources? Was there someone you worked with, or was there books you read that you could recommend to people to look into and check out?
I did follow Temple Grandin's writings. I listened to as many of her videos as I could get. I read, now I forget the author, there's a guru for social stories. I used our SLP for visuals, and used visuals all over my house for the preschool and early age years. There was no one resource.
Okay.
To be honest with you.
But multiple. Yeah. And you kind of talked about like the visual piece. So yeah, breaking down the steps is important, but having the visual cues, it sounds like, is just as critical to help to follow some of these steps.
And those kind of once they've learned to use visuals, they start out pretty primary. But if you think of everyday life, we have signs, we have road signs, we have directional signs in buildings, we have office signs. So we use visuals all the time. So it's a very acceptable tool to teach as a life skill.
Mm-hmm. You're definitely right that sometimes we forget and take for granted the tools and the resources that we have available that we use on a day-to-day basis, right? So that's just a good reminder that it is something that we all rely on signs throughout our community to be able to help us get through our days and to learn new things.
Absolutely.
Now, are there any other lessons that you have learned along the way that would have influenced how you supported and encouraged boys from childhood into adolescence? So there's, people talk about teenage years can be tough. I guess, did the boys embrace this way of learning? Did you have some challenges, and how did you kind of overcome them?
Yes, as anybody who has raised children from youth through teenagehood to adulthood, adulting is difficult for everyone. I mean, we all go through an awkward stage as teenagers, and children with disabilities is absolutely no different. There's a few key things, and this went kind of right through from elementary school up. I learned to always set the bar high, and always assume they can first. It's just a matter of us being family, teachers, whatever, figuring out how. It's not that they can't do it. They maybe cannot do it that way. And if the goal is to do, I don't know, read a book, maybe they can flip the pages and someone can read it to them. There's always a way. So I found that setting the bar high, starting earlier than later, and assume that they can, it's just going to be a different path to get there. And I think that's what carried us through. And it was not always easy. We had step backs sometimes where we lost skill. And it was hard to remember. You just surround yourself with good people who think positive and have your same beliefs. And you step back and go, okay, we're going to do this a different way. I mean, mom has her meltdown sometimes, just like the kids do.
It's important to remember, because I think in so many instances as parents, right, whether it's neurotypical kids or neurodivergent, and I can speak from my experience of having 2 children diagnosed with ADHD, it's easy to give up at times and kind of throw the towel in, or feel like you've tried something once and it's just not it's not effective, it's not working, give up on it. And I think you just reminding everybody that there is always a way. You can have a meltdown, as you said, you can get frustrated, but setting the bar high and always assuming that they can first and not giving up quickly is such a key to helping them achieve that bar that you set high, right?
Yes, I always kind of looked at it as it wasn't that they can't, it's that I haven't found the right way yet. And I tried to instill that thinking in the people that were around us, supporting us.
And that's important too, because so often I think teachers and, people that, well, in school of teachers, right, and as we get older, employers, and people want to learn, and people do as well as what they know. So having the opportunity to teach others and share that information with them, I think is also encouraging, and it helps people come to the table with a different mindset, maybe. That's a good lesson as well. And now, so my next question is, and this was one of the questions that was kind of unanswered, I think, at the conference, is at what age did your boys first start to express an interest in getting a job or in maybe moving out and kind of starting to live on their own? And is it something that they brought up to you, or is this a conversation that you had with them? So can you kind of tell us the story about how that happened, and maybe a little bit about their employment journey, and then also kind of your very innovative and creative way of moving them out of the house?
So probably around the time, maybe they were 12 to 14, they started to realize that there were wants that they had. And wants, we had worked with money. These wants cost money, and they had started to learn the value of money. And about that time is typically when even neurotypical kids will start to get little summer jobs or work for the neighbor or help for a day here. So we started having those conversations then. When they got to high school, we were linked with Partners in Employment, but it wasn't called Partners in Employment. It was a different group. Youth.
It was transitioning youth to employment.
That's it. So we linked with Partners in Employment in that program, and with the student services teacher at the high school who worked on employment skills and talking about that this is what you do when you're an adult. This is how you get your wants and needs. So we started at different jobs. I mean, they're still in high school. And I have to say they stayed in high school till they were 21, till they aged out and they did get their grade 12. But we did it over a span of 7 years instead of 3. Fortunately, we had that ability. So that's how we started with employment. Started doing some job shadowing. They had job coaches. They learned skills of like what a good employee is like, how to respond to an employer, how to build a resume, all those kind of skills while they were still in high school, which I think is super important.
I agree. I think that starting in that high school and those later teen years is important to start working towards developing some of the work skills and also just exploring different employment work sites and working with different employers, because I'm sure the boys learned that depending where you go, people have different expectations, right? And so that exploration and trying out different jobs is important for sure. And do you want to kind of share where the boys are working now?
Sure. I just want to kind of a shout out that we had some really good local employers who are willing to take them on for work experiences. The local staples, Tim Hortons, the co-op, and then a big Cherrydale golf course and Saltcoats, the town of Saltcoats. We had like lot of very good employer teams that took on students and were willing to, give them the mentorship that they needed on how to be a good employee. Currently, we're very fortunate. Braden's working for Ministry of Highways. He's been there for, I think, 4 years now. He calls it his dream job. So what more could you ask? And Taylor's working with SaskChowell, which also has been a very inclusive employer. So we're very fortunate there.
And they're great employees, right? The feedback that you've received, I think I've heard as well, is that they are both doing a great job. They fit in well, and and maintaining jobs for quite a long time now, which is also wonderful. And thanks for giving the shout out to those employers. We're very lucky to have so many employers, not just in Yorkton, but as you mentioned, the Saltcoats and those rural communities in our region who step up and are always willing to give high school students opportunities and the people that we support opportunities, which is great. So thanks for doing that. All right, so then the next thing that I wanted to kind of chat about, or the question that you is around that moving the boys out of the house and your creative model when it comes to supported living. How'd you come up with that? Well, tell us the model and tell us how you came up with it.
It started actually way back when they were 8, 9, 10, believe it or not. My parents had a farm. Yeah, my parents had a farm. They were my main babysitters, actually. So I would work and the boys would stay there. And they got into all sorts of stuff on the farm. And I just knew things like self-propelled hand rototiller, and they hooked up a wagon to it and rode around in a wagon behind a rototiller, and an old set of axle wheels that they pushed around the yard and gave the cats rides. And I just knew that they needed to be somewhere where they could explore safely, because we were living in town at the time and in Yorkton, and they couldn't even ride their bike or walk across the street to the playground without me, because they just didn't get to look for cars. And then they would bolt back home. It just wasn't safe. So I knew that if I wanted them to explore freely and me to have some peace of mind, we needed to look at maybe a different living situation. So fortunately, I had the opportunity to consider building a house out on the farm where my family is. So that started about age 10. And planning a house, it was like, okay, I don't know where they're going to end up. I don't know how their abilities are going to grow, but I can hope that they can live, like my best case scenario at the time was somewhat independently. So what I did was I built a walkout basement house with 3 master bedrooms, 1 for me upstairs and 2 for them downstairs, with a living room area and a little kitchenette area. And I thought at that point was a pipe dream, but that's how it all started. And it's kind of grown from their rooms, quote unquote, they call it, to their apartment. So now that's their house.
It's amazing and so innovative. Accessibilities, I shared with you that we're doing some work around looking at what are some innovative home support models. People are coming forward and saying, what's been around in terms of group homes and supported living models works for some individuals, but we want more options. And when you had initially shared your story with me and kind of how I didn't realize you planned that so far in advance, but I thought it was so innovative and such a great model. And we talked about just intergenerational living, right? As we were preparing for the podcast, that more and more it's happening. There's individuals, children, young adults are living with their parents more. And in some cultures, that is very typical, whether you experience a disability or not. And I think in your instance, it does normalize it. Everybody has their freedom, everybody has their space, and you can rely on each other. You kind of showed that, hey, they're still around to shovel snow, right? But they have their own space.
Exactly. And if you think about disability as not just a diagnosis, but we all become disabled as we age, it's evolved into I'm the caregiver for them when they're little and they're learning and growing and becoming independent. And I can see in decades coming up, should they choose to stay in the house that they're in the apartment they're in, that the role starts to reverse a bit as I become maybe less physically able, as like hauling the softener salt downstairs, those kind of things. Mm-hmm. The older I get, the more they then take on a little bit of that role. And like you said, intergenerational living, it's working for all of us.
And it's such a reciprocal relationship, right? We talked about the boys relied on you when they were younger, and now you're relying a little bit on them, and it creates that interdependence, I guess. So that's wonderful. And do they receive, I never asked this before, but do they receive any supported living support from anyone other than maybe yourself or your family?
I do have applied for and got cognitive disability funding for some mentorship. Mm-hmm. So that for social skill development, and also we're using it right now for cooking and home skills, actually.
Oh, cool.
So that's the only financial support that they have outside of their own financial earning.
Okay. It's interesting because one of the things that you had shared with me is, supported living, and it really resonated as we talk about innovation and home support, that supported living isn't always going to be Monday to Friday between the hours of 9 a.m. and 5 p.m., right? Do you want to kind of flag that or highlight a little bit about, what could be some supported living needs, and in your perspective, what would be the ideal hours or the flexibility that would be provided when it comes to home supports?
This would be very individual. I can see that some individuals would need around the clock, maybe not in-person support, but have an access person that they could get a hold of in the middle of the night or something if they were scared or someone knocked at the door and they didn't know what to do. Mm-hmm. For my guys, they have the ability to know, what, mom's awake during this hour and this hour, and we can get a hold of her, or we can text and leave a message, for example. Mm-hmm. But although they just live downstairs, they'll FaceTime me if they need something. Like they were cooking supper last night and needed, they had a recipe for this item, but the dough that they had bought had a different instruction on the container, and that was confusing to them. So they just FaceTime me, read me the instructions. I asked questions to walk them through the problem solving, and less than 5 minutes, they were on their own making their supper. So that kind of
That's
support needs to
fantastic.
be there in the moment.
And I love that you don't just run downstairs and fix the problem that they're having or the issue they're dealing with, but you actually ask questions and you guide them to come up with their own solutions, right? That problem solving.
Yeah, that's not always easy. Sometimes you think it would be easier to just do it, but if you
Hmm.
just do it today, then you have to just do it for the next year or 2 or 5. So sometimes put the effort in now, they walk it through, they learn the skill, and you're free.
Yeah, that's amazing. And that's such a good lesson for many families and many parents out there to be able to remember that the long-term outcome you're striving for versus the in the moment solution, right?
Yes, always you have to keep your thoughts end result. What do you want this to look like in the end?
Mm-hmm.
That's our
Mm-hmm.
goal. And kind of work backwards from there to where we're at.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And so speaking of moving out and, encouraging your child, sometimes, and we've heard this at the conference from some families, is um, the adult child might express that they're ready to move out. And some family members, maybe the siblings, are 100% on board, think it's a great idea, and the parents are maybe hesitant, have some fears, anxieties around it. Or it might be that one spouse is supportive and one may not be quite there yet. Do you have any advice for families how they can maybe help the rest of the family get on board to support some of these bigger goals of moving out or employment?
That's a really tough one. Maybe fortunately for me, I didn't have a spouse, so I didn't have to make those concessions potentially for a different view. But I know that not both the grandparents were on board with some of the decisions that I made. But
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of the hesitancy is only based on care for the individual and fear of the unknown and wanting to protect. So I just be understanding of where people are coming from, that their hesitancy maybe is past trust issues, maybe concern for harm, and know that it's normal to have fear. It's normal to fail and make mistakes. And I always said to my kids, if it's not immoral or illegal, then we can always go back and do it again. Because I meet people often where at their worst. So you have to kind of stop and think where that's coming from and not take it personally.
Mm-hmm. And I wonder for the people who were wondering this, like at the conference, this was, I think, one of the questions that was posed is maybe even taking it back to the start of our interview when you talked about first believe that they can, right? And kind of set that bar high. And what steps can we take to get there? Might definitely be maybe a good starting point for some individuals as well.
Absolutely.
You've done a lot of advocating. And, I think parents have shared with us that advocating can be powerful, but it can also be exhausting at times. From your experience, what are some of the key skills or the mindsets that are needed to be a strong advocate with your children while also maintaining positive relationships with, schools, with agencies, with support services, and not burning bridges per se?
That's huge. And probably one of the hardest things that never goes away in advocacy. Advocacy is powerful, but it's powerful as long as it doesn't become fighting or battles, which
Mm-hmm.
often it can because it gets emotional. Because these are your children. It's not just like, I don't know, you're not just fighting to get your car fixed. These are your children. This is their futures you're talking about. So
Mm-hmm.
I think ask a lot of questions And what else I did was I tried to understand the institutions or organizations that we were involved with. And sometimes that meant writing letters. Sometimes it meant asking for meetings, face-to-face meetings, because things can be construed differently in text and email. Sometimes that meant applying and joining the board of organizations and learning the organization, how it works, what its limitations are from the inside, which gives you more power to advocate on the outside. I kept a lot of good records. I documented things so I didn't forget. Simple things like in school, get to know the parents and all the kids in their classroom, because you get to know then what the teacher's dealing with. Just surround yourself with those who actually believe and give yourself the grace to make mistakes and fail, because you will many times. You just have to
That's
pick yourself up
wonderful.
and do it again another day.
Mm. Persevere, right? Like I said, kind of for me, like if I had to kind of describe you in 2 words, I definitely would say, very inspiring and persevering and persistent in a good way. I've seen you advocate for your boys. I've been with meetings with you, and I've always said that you were very respectful and well prepared. And I think you kind of talked about the importance of taking the time to understand and to learn and appreciate that there's some limitations from the system perspective, but they're not limitations that can't necessarily be overcome with some innovative ideas and solutions and working together, right, to build those better circumstances or communities for your voice.
Absolutely. And I know at times emotion got the better of me, but I think you have, as parents or as moms, we have to give ourselves like the grace to be able to do that and go, okay, that wasn't the best approach, but that was the mom and me coming out. So it's okay.
And I think it is okay. I think you love your children, right? And you know what is best for them. And sometimes trying to express that to individuals can be difficult or frustrating if you don't feel like it's being heard. So those emotions can easily come out. But I think being able to focus on the outcome and knowing, again, that you're there to kind of work together and being vulnerable and being authentic is not a bad thing. So I'm glad that you're letting people know giving yourself grace is very, very important and good reminders for
Absolutely.
many families who are advocating out there. And so
Exactly.
speaking of kind of giving yourself grace, I know one of the things that came up as a question is, people are busy. There's lots on everyone's plate. There's pressures and it's juggling. And for some families, there's other children that they are also supporting and raising in their household. When it comes to raising a child experiencing disability, sometimes that can mean added schedules, so medical appointments, OT, PT, and so on. The question was, during busy schedules and competing priorities, how do you prioritize the skill building and staying consistent over time, especially during teenage and young adult years? And we touched a little bit about the teenage years, but in general, how do you continue to kind of juggle everything? And you were a nurse and a single mom, so any advice you got?
Lean on those around you. Pick good people around you. Use your family. Peers are important. Utilize mentorship. So I did utilize mentorship, like I said, through cognitive disability funding, employment coaching. I guess as a mom, I can only speak for you. Don't have to be everything to your child. So delegate. That's hard, and pick your priorities. Maybe you think that these 5 things need to be done, but maybe you only have the energy and time for 3. And for teenagers, they drive all their parents crazy, so that's okay. Our neuro not typical teenagers drive their parents crazy too. There's no real answer. I mean, families today are just juggling so much anyway, and honestly, fortunately, I didn't have or not fortunate. I didn't have other neurotypical kids. I just had the twins. It was just them and I, and they were both at the same stage at the same time. So as far as like skill building and stuff, I built it into what I already had to do, day-to-day household tasks, or traveling in the car, we'd read me a book, or let's play the name game, or, it just was built into day-to-day stuff. Grocery shopping, there's lots of skills that you can work on around grocery shopping, from social skills to math to planning to executive function. You just use everyday life is what I had to do.
That's great advice, because it really, like you said, it doesn't necessarily have to be extra time set aside to work on some of these skills if you just incorporate it into what you're doing already, and maybe give yourself a little extra time to get through those tasks, right?
Exactly. Our sensory heavy work that we had to do for OT was, pushing snow on the driveway and hauling groceries in with me. Okay, our heavy work's done for that, PT, effort, or you just use those things differently.
And that's great too, because you don't have to have additional equipment. You don't have to necessarily purchase things that are very, highly costly, but use those everyday things around you during those everyday tasks. And that's great. That's good advice. And so if you had to choose one service or support that was just absolutely invaluable in helping the boys get to where they are today, or the young men now, what was it? Was there one thing that was just absolutely invaluable?
I hate to choose, because it does take a whole team and it takes a village. But I do have to say occupational therapy, because a therapist has been in and out of our life right from the very beginning of diagnosis, to understanding sensory processing, to OT SLP with communication, helping me understand theory of mind, with executive functioning, breaking down tasks, helping me understand why they're behaving this way, or why they respond to this way and respond, differently in a different setting. It has to be occupational therapy, who we are still utilizing private OT for. The boys have a long-term goal. They want to go to Disney Paris on their own. They want to plan the trip. Basically, there will be an escort with them, but they want to do everything from planning the trip to arranging the trip to setting itinerary to their budgeting. So it's a 2-year goal, and life has popped up on Braden, and he had some car repairs he needed to do, so it's been bumped back a bit, but so we're still using occupational therapy today. So I have to say that, and I know it makes me sad, because I know not everybody has access, but I believe they should.
And were you able to, CogDisc or any other funding, was there any opportunities to be able to receive funding for the occupational therapy? I think you mentioned yes, but can you kind of clarify that, if there was anything available?
Yes. Cognitive disability funding has been huge. And people do not even realize sometimes with different work benefits, like I could access some occupational therapy through my work benefits. It's under PT, OT, that kind of stuff, and applied allied professionals. So there is some funding there, not a lot. I don't know about through programs like children's therapies, if there's some available there, but yes, cognitive disability funding is how I did ours.
Okay.
And then in school, we had access to occupational therapy in school, OT, and SLP.
And so thanks for sharing that, because I think quite often, like you said, it's so hard to decide, but I think people, parents, families want to know, is there one thing that kind of made a huge difference, or maybe and for you, even just like you talked about, it's the consistency in that resource too, right? Being able to access that service throughout their lifespan so far, from diagnosis to them being these young men planning a trip to Europe.
Right. I mean, right from toilet training and feeding issues to handwriting and fine motor control to, sensory processing and meltdowns and anxiety to, now planning a trip to Europe. Wow.
I mean, are you going? Are you the chaperone who's going to go to Paris?
I hope I'm asked to go.
Oh, well, as we kind of get close to an end here of the second episode, is there one piece of advice, encouragement, key message that you want families, individuals experiencing disabilities to take away today?
Comparison is the thief of joy, I believe. So don't compare your child even to another sibling, because I have identical twin boys who are both autistic, who are both about the same ability, but are two very different guys. And I just think you should visualize, don't lose your dreams for your children. Don't lose their dreams. Visualize where you ideally want to be. And then life is the fun part to get there. So just how do we get there? One step at a time.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that ending and kind of that inspirational way to leave this episode, and for joining me today. You definitely had a lot of nuggets and some great advice, and also just really, I appreciate that you so many times mentioned, give yourself grace. You don't have to do this on your own. You can lean on others, and give yourself time to get there. And I think you mentioned a couple of times, if you feel like you failed, it's not the end. You can try again. And so, you've been an inspiration to me, and I know to so many others as well. So we wish you all the best, and we wish the boys all the best, the young, Braden and Taylor, I shouldn't call them the boys anymore, all the best along their journey. And I hope to have you come back in a couple years and tell us how things are going, and how the car paying off is going, and how the trip went. And so hopefully we'll have you back here.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
And to everyone listening, thank you for being part of our second episode. We invite you to join us for the next episodes, where we will continue to bring back individuals with lived experience and professionals in a disability sector to answer some of your questions. Follow us on social media pages, Facebook and Instagram, and keep an eye out for our podcast guest announcement. We will give you the opportunity to ask questions in the comment section, and we will ensure that our guests respond to what is most important to you. Once again, thanks for joining us.